There we go. All right, so we're hitting record, and we are doing Module 9, Lesson 3. We're talking about Middle East. Oh, no, Africa, is it? Yeah, it is Africa, isn't it? You're right. I don't know why I have Middle East on here. I should fix that. In fact, let me fix that now. Thank you for reminding me. I got ahead of myself. Module 9, Lesson 3, African conflicts. All right, so if you have not already, can you guys open up your Module 9, Lesson 3 course arc and your Module 9, Lesson 3 journal? You guys could get that open. That would be amazing. And I'll switch over just to help you guys remember which one you're supposed to be doing. So we're looking at the history of the conflicts in the continent of Africa and how it is still affected by its history of conflict. I mean, obviously, we'll talk about the Boer War when we're talking about South Africa. We'll definitely talk about Somalia. We'll talk about tribal warfare. And then, when we talked about, remember when they did the scramble for Africa and all the European countries like carved up their parts, their sections of Africa? All of that, as we know that we've talked about, have led to tons of conflict in Africa. When they all took their piece of Africa, they shoved groups who traditionally hated each other all together, and then pick sides and treated one better than the other. And while they were being colonized, a lot of those tribes would kind of the enemy of my enemy as my friend. So like, I don't really like you, but we're going to work together to get rid of the colonizers. And then once the Europeans left, then all of this, not only historical issues between tribes, but then of course how different tribes were treated by the colonizers, like boiled over. So that would be like Rwanda when we talk about the Hutu and the Tutsi. In Darfur, when we talk about northern and southern Darfur and Islam. We will talk about Somalia and Eritrea and all of those things. So you have a lot of areas that, Africa has just been, it's been a country of conflict, or a continent, I should say, of conflict that has birthed many countries out of conflict. Okay. So we're going to look at conflict and or diplomacy and global interactions and the rise and fall of governmental systems. Okay. So hopefully everybody has their course arc open. Can you guys give me the thumbs up reaction if you have your course arc open for me? Okay, I'm seeing some that say yes. Hey, Braden, if you have not already done so, you need to do your scholars attendance for this week. Okay. I ask you guys to use reactions all the time, Adriel. All right. So, yeah. Okay. So we've talked about Africa's had many conflicts throughout its history. We have talked about, well, because we've talked about the Eastern Hemisphere, we've gone through all different types of aspects and themes when we talk about Africa. We've talked about the conflicts between the colonizing countries and the native Africans. We've kind of touched on the tribal conflicts that happened before the colonizers, as well as, after the colonizers. So we're going to look at some of the major conflicts that have actually impacted Africa as a continent. Because if you notice, lots and lots of countries in there, right? All right, so let's go to vocabulary. All right, so Afrikaner, due to the colonization of southern Africa in the 1800s, there are still many that are considered to be Afrikaners. That would be the Dutch. Afrikaner is, well, you'll see it's the vocabulary used in South Africa, the country, from the Dutch coming in and colonizing that area. Civil war. We know civil war, right? Civil war will usually break out in a country if both sides want power. Unfortunately, even today, that is still a major issue in the countries in Africa, is the constant civil war, the constant changing of governments and who is in power, which is why so many countries in Africa cannot seem to even get up to the developing, let alone developed, because they just aren't stable. If you don't have a stable government, it's really hard to have a stable economy and to do things for your people and move your way up, right? The Boers. So the Boers settled in southern Africa, would later fight a war for control. These were Dutch farmers that moved to South Africa. Guerrilla. So when we're talking about this type of guerrilla, not the kind like a silverback, but guerrilla, as in guerrilla warfare tactics, can keep the other side on its toes. And that's like, instead of everybody stepping out onto a battlefield and just shooting at each other, it's using sneaky tactics to get one over on your enemy, right? Canal. So canals make travel easier as they connect larger bodies of water together. So think of the Suez Canal that connected the Mediterranean to the Red Sea and then away. So that became the shortcut instead of going all the way around southern Africa. They could literally cut through the Suez Canal. All right, and we've done Afrikaner. Okay, we've done all of those. So let's do a member of the Dutch and Huguenot population that settled in southern Africa. Yep, that would be the Boers. Okay. A member of a small independent group taking part in irregular fighting. Awesome. Yes, guerrilla. Artificial waterway to allow passage of boats and ships. Yes, good. War between citizens of the same country. Absolutely. And then an Afrikaans-speaking person in South Africa who is one descendant from the Dutch and Huguenot settlers. And that's an Afrikaner. All right, does everybody have this done? Can you guys give me the thumbs up if you've got this completed in your course arc, please? Oh, you know what guerrilla is? Hey, and here's the thing, and I know some people are like, oh my gosh, video games. My son played a game called Dynasty Warriors. It's a little bit older than you guys. And it took you through all of the Chinese dynasties. So my son really learned Chinese dynasties and Chinese histories that way. And then there's another one, Assassin's Creed, and it takes you through different areas, like different areas of the world and different time periods.
Yeah, I play Assassin's Creed too.
So he learned a lot through there. When we're talking about warfare, Call of Duty, and all of that, like those are actually, they help, especially when you guys get into world history. You'll talk about warfare in U.S. history, but you really get into warfare in world history. And so those games, like you're going to recognize a lot of the stuff that you talk about if you play those types of games. So I don't have a problem. Guys, I used to even use not just Minecraft, there's another one that's really big. Shoot, it's been a couple of years since I've taught AP Human. I have to think about it, but there's another game that we talk about in AP Human Geography because there are really big key vocabulary words that are part of that game. So I will use whatever it takes to help you guys. So the fact that like making what guerrilla warfare is because of Call of Duty, that is absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I think you can learn in multiple ways. And if that helps you remember and retain something, even better. All right, so tribal warfare, okay? This has gone on for centuries in Africa. Before the scramble for Africa, it was common for tribes to go to war with other tribes. Why? The same reasons of wars happen today. They wanted land, resources, power, etc. The following article provides information about the possible tribal conflict. According to science, it may have been nearly 10,000 years ago. So remember when we talked about the slave trade, one of the things, especially in Western Africa, is these tribes would go into the interior and they would wage war on other tribes, and then the tribes that lost became slaves to the tribes that won. And that is how these tribes became rich with the Dutch settlers, or not the settlers, because it was the Dutch who originally started the slave trade. When they came in and they're like, oh, we need people for slaves, because remember, slavery has been around forever. And they were like, oh, well, we've got some right here. And they're like, we'll give you money and weapons, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the African tribes were like, well, deal. And then when they realized, hey, we can get more out of these people that we've enslaved just because we were fighting them, well, this is lucrative. And it just came this huge gargantuan thing. But like, it starts with the tribes waging wars on one another. Okay. So remember, it's blue, which means it's telling us it is a hyperlink. So you click on the link and it talks about ancient massacre site in Africa, points to violent tribal past, women and children among the dead. Yes, but instead of calling it slavery, right, Taj, now they call it's under the blanket of human trafficking, right? Because it's multitude of reasons why they would traffic the people. And yes, it is huge in Africa today. All right, so they talk about evidence of a massacre 10,000 years ago has been unearthed in Africa, pushing back the known record of intergroup warfare. So they're like, holy crap, even 10,000 years ago, this was going on. Skeletal remains of 27 individuals that have at least 8 women and 6 children were found in Narok, which is 30 kilometers west of Lake Turkana in Kenya. 12 of the fossilized remains were in an almost complete state and revealed the victims had died a violent death with signs of severe blows to the head and face, broken bones, and arrow wounds. 4 individuals were found in a position that suggested that their hands had been tied. One of these was a woman in the late stages of pregnancy. There were fetal bones that were found where her abdomen cavity would be. The remarkable discovery, led by researchers from Cambridge University Center for Human Evolutionary Studies, is the one that we're basically looking at. Professor Rainier Grun played a key role in dating the remains, said that until now, the fossil evidence for war suggested it coincided with the start of agricultural practices. This is one of the earliest examples where you see a whole group wiped out. As soon as people started staying in one place, there is lots of evidence of war in all societies. And he points to Syria, Egypt, and the Mayan empires as examples. The question is whether this warfare happened with hunter-gatherers. There have been evidence of people killing each other before, but it's singular. So certainly this is one of the earliest examples where you see a whole group. The remains were found partly or completely exposed in 2012, preserved in a sediment of a lagoon that has long since dried up. Radiocarbon and uranium dating techniques used in the skeletons and sediment and shell samples place the attack as happening between 9,500 and 10,500 years ago. And then these would be the remains. And this, as you can see, that they're like in a fetal position, right? And you see their hands, the skeletal bones.
Yeah, like how they're crossed.
Mm-hmm. And so when they're talking about this, when they're talking about, you're seeing women and children as well. He said it was unusual to find women and children being killed in these types of things because generally it was like your warriors, right? Your hunters, the men. And so if you saw death in that perspective, it was always tended to be men, right? women's skeletons generally were not looking like, they were, their hands were tied or that they had been like killed. And the fact that they're in a group talks about just a large group, right? You find men and juvenile males killed, but here in this particular one that they're talking about, there's no distinction between the males and females. It's like a group came in and went like, you're all gone. They said that they found 3 artifacts embedded in 2 of the bodies as the possible remains of arrows or spear tips. These human remains record the intentional killing of a small band of foragers with no deliberate burial, provide unique evidence that warfare was part of the repertoire of intergroup relations, even among prehistoric hunter-gatherers. So you guys understand what they're saying? Generally, in hunter-gatherers, you did not see large-scale warfare like this. It would be, maybe 1 or 2, right? It generally, when you would see group versus group, is when they started settling down into villages. So this is the first time that they've actually seen it where it was hunter-gatherers and in a large group like this. Okay. And that's them just pulling that up from there. All right, so let's go back. All right, so any questions on that part that I just read to you? Anything that stuck out to you?
I feel like the way that they positioned the bodies, it's normally a sign of remorse, the way they position them. Unless they died that way. That's different. But
I think what they're trying to
yeah,
say
and if they
is that they
died
think
that
that
way,
they
that's a
died in those
different
positions.
place.
Not
But
that
if they were placed that way, that's normally a sign of remorse. So
yes. And I think what they mean by them dying in those positions is like the hands and the feet look like they're bound. And so not so much remorse. And like Samuel was calling it early war crimes. Yeah, 27 people dead. That's definitely a war crime, right? Well, I guess you could call it a war crime, not a modern day definition of a war crime, because these are not countries. These were, just groups, but kind of that same idea. Yeah. I mean, you also got to think about that time period. 10,000 years ago, it was, you were either, the hunter or the prey kind of thing. It's kill or be killed, eat or don't eat. Maybe during that time period, that's where like the food was located, and maybe there wasn't a lot of food at that time period. Still don't have a lot of information about like what the environment that was BC. So, yeah. All right. So let's move on because we talked about it being 10,500 years ago. Since we're only 2000 into AD. All right, so let's go to the Boer War. All right, so I've heard it pronounced Boer and I've heard it pronounced bear. Either one. I've always said Boer. The Boer War of 1899 to 1902. Well, yeah, because it's kind of a Dutch pronunciation. Was the result of British determination to dominate areas of South Africa that had been settled by the Boers and were growing in economic strength. The British eventually defeated the Boers and accomplished their goal in unification of South Africa under British imperial direction. It took the regular British army nearly 3 years, however, to subdue the smaller Boer force of mounted riflemen who had no formal military training. The war thus brought British invincibility into question and caused their military to develop a new system of tactics and techniques. Remember, guys, this is after America, the colonies, right, had declared their independence, and we kicked off a lot of countries trying to declare their independence as well. So for Great Britain, there we're going to be like, oh, no, you're not. But it made it really hard for them. Boer is the Dutch word for a farmer and came to apply to a people, also known as Afrikaners, who had been born in the Dutch Cape Colony. They were a mixture of Dutch, German, French, and non-European. In October 1899, the Boer commando units responded to ongoing hostility with the British by advancing from the Boer lands of the Transvaal against the British forces deployed around its borders. A string of Boer successes until January of 1900 included the sieges of Ladysmith, Kimberley, and Mafeking. From February to August of 1900, the momentum shifted in favor of the British forces. Understanding the need for mobility, Roberts and his chief of staff, Kitchener, changed their tactics and were able to raise the Boer sieges and organized counteroffensive that scored several victories, including the June 5th capture of Pretoria, an important Transvaal city, which is in South Africa. The Boers responded to these reversals with dispersed guerrilla warfare that prevented the British from taking control and won them a much stronger bargaining position at the end of the war. From 1900 until 1902, Boer commanders sabotaged British communications, isolated their units, resisted all British attempts to capture them. To defeat this force, Kitchener copied the tactics of the Spanish that they had used in Cuba, burning the farms in which the Boer raiders depended for sustenance and herding 120,000 Boer women and children into concentration camps, where an estimated 20,000 died of disease and neglect. Under these circumstances, Boer resistance capitulated. The Treaty of Vereeniging, I always pronounce that incorrectly, ended the war on May 31st of 1902. The Boers accepted British sovereignty but retained control of native affairs. Through further agitation, they won back representative government in 1907. British guaranteed £3 million compensation for the destroyed farms. Total casualties for the British were 5,774 killed, 22,829 wounded. The Boers lost about 4,000, but there's no way to estimate the number wounded. And then we've got a short little video on the Boer. It's like the Boer War in 3 minutes. So I'm going to mute myself and then I'm going to play the video. If I can find my little thing. There we go.
During the Napoleonic Wars, the British seized the Dutch colony in South Africa. The Boers, the descendants of the Dutch colonists, lived under British rule until 1835, when, inspired by the ban on slavery, wars and a lack of land, they embarked on the Great Trek to find new land. The British annexed their first republic, Natalia, in 1843, so the Boers formed two new republics, the Orange Free State and Transvaal, also known as the South African Republic. Although initially uninterested in the region, the discovery of diamonds pricked the British interest, especially after the global financial panic of 1873. In 1877, the British proposed annexing the republics, and the Boers, who were nearing bankruptcy and fearful of the Zulus, finally agreed. However, just 2 years later, the British crushed the Zulus, and this freed the Boers to voice their disapproval of the annexation. In late 1880, 10,000 Boers gathered under the leadership of Paul Kruger and declared their independence. The British responded quickly and sent troops north, but they were ambushed at Bronkhorstspruit. Throughout January and February of 1881, the British continued to attack the Boers, but in the battles of Lane's Neck and Majuba Hill, the skilled marksmen and the Boer commandos beat them back. So peace was made in March and the Boer states had their independence guaranteed. The war ended just before the scramble for Africa began. European powers began rapidly colonizing Africa. Notably, the Germans took southwest Africa, and this threatened British Cape. Then gold was discovered near modern-day Johannesburg, and the economy of Transvaal improved so much that it threatened the dominance of the Cape Colony. So the British, particularly Cecil Rhodes, once again looked to annex the Boer republics. Meanwhile, thousands of foreigners had migrated to Transvaal during the gold rush. These Uitlanders lacked a lot of rights and discontent in their community was high. So, in late 1895, Cecil Rhodes organised a raid, the Jameson Raid, into Transvaal, hoping to encourage an Uitlander rebellion. However, it failed, and this only convinced the Boer states to import arms from Europe. Also, interestingly, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany sent a telegram to Kruger congratulating the Boers, which, in the build-up to World War I, worsened Anglo-German relations. Finally, in September 1899, with tension still high, Transvaal sent an ultimatum demanding the build-up of British troops withdrew from their border, but it was ignored and war was declared in October. In the early months of the war, the Boers and the foreign volunteers in their ranks were able to take advantage of the unprepared British and lay siege to Mafeking, Ladysmith and Kimberley. But in January, hundreds of thousands of British reinforcements arrived in South Africa and advanced to relieve the besieged cities. Their advance was only temporarily halted at the Battle of Sepong Kop, a battle which Mahatma Gandhi and Winston Churchill both witnessed. However, the now numerically superior British continued their advance. By February, they had relieved both Ladysmith and Kimberley, and the following month they took Bloemfontein, the capital of the Orange Free State. In May, Robert Baden-Powell, founder of the Scouts movement, had relieved Mafeking, and in June both Johannesburg and Pretoria were captured. The war seemed over. In Britain, the victorious Prime Minister Salisbury was re-elected, and they declared the South African Republic, taking away the official title of Transvaal. However, many Boers, led by the likes of Delray, Jan Smuts and Louis Botha, launched a guerrilla war. Once again, the Boers had some initial success, but the British Army, under the leadership of Herbert Kitchener, responded brutally. They adopted a scorched earth policy to crush the guerrillas. This included torching crops and houses and putting Boer civilians into concentration camps. The guerrilla war went on until 1902, but the Boers finally gave up, and the annexation of the states was made final. The Boers did receive limited self-governance a few years later, and then in 1910, the Union of South Africa was declared. Although it was a British Dominion, Boer leaders such as Botha and Smuts served as Prime Minister. The guerrilla war, failure of cavalry and the likes helped modernise warfare and better prepared the British for World War I. The war also worried the British enough to bring them out of their diplomatic isolation, and they signed an alliance with Japan. Plus, because so many poor people in Britain were unfit for military service, the British introduced social reforms, and this marked the beginning of the welfare state.
Okay, so the first question that we have on here is, who won the Boer War? The British, right? Good. This ended the Boer War of 1902. There we go. Gurning. The Boers were able to use guerrilla warfare to win some battles. True. The fighting tactics that the British learned in the Boer War would be things they use in upcoming World War I. True. All right, so let's make sure that you guys all have these answered correctly in your course arc. Okay, we're all good there? Yeah? All right. We're going to move into Somalia. All right, so Somalia is known as, in a portion of Africa, is known as the Horn of Africa. If you look, it looks like a rhinoceros's horn, hence the name Horn of Africa. So throughout the 1990s, Somalia was embroiled in a vicious Somalian civil war, which has claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands of Somalis. Rival warlords fighting each other for control of the country fueled the conflict. Civilian population was devastated by the clan warfare, and many were starving to death. When the international community sent food, the warlords hoarded it, and the threat of mass starvation loomed largely. The UN decided to send in peacekeeping force to restore order in Somalia and ensure relief supplies made it to the hungry masses. A UN force of more than 35,000 troops arrived in December of 1992. Although disarmament and peace treaties were signed by representatives from 15 Somalian factions in early 1993, UN forces came under repeated attack from Somalian militias. Most of the European US troops left the country by March, reducing the UN forces mainly to military units from third world countries. These units bore the brunt of the continued violence, and Adid's men were believed to be responsible for the death of 24 Pakistanis in 1993. During the summer, United States sent a special forces unit to Mogadishu to hunt down Adid and arrest him. We had already launched several raids before the Battle of Mogadishu, but the warlord had managed to elude U.S. forces. While they continued to hunt for Adid, U.S. forces also began to focus on capturing Adid's key men. In October of 93, U.S. intelligence in Somalia received word from an informant that Omar Salad, Adid's political advisor, and Abdi Hassan Awali, Adid's interior minister, were meeting in a building near Bakar Martin in the heart of Adid's territory. At approximately 3:45, about 100 U.S. Special Forces were dropped into the heart of Mogadishu and were immediately met by heavy fire. In the ensuing firefight, 2 U.S. Black Hawk helicopters were brought down by rocket-propelled grenades. The rest of the U.S. forces were pinned down as hundreds of armed Somalis swarmed towards them. By the time a UN force was able to rescue the trapped men, the battle had lasted 18 hours and 18 US soldiers were dead, more than 70 seriously wounded. Somalian casualties were estimated at 500 dead and more than 1,000 injured. Since both Salad and Awali were captured during the operation, the mission was technically a success, but it turned out to be a huge public relations nightmare for US President Bill Clinton's administration. After CNN aired footage of dead US soldiers being dragged through the streets of Mogadishu, an outraged public and an angry US Congress prompted the White House to end the mission to capture Aidid immediately. Although Aidid was killed in '96 during more factional fighting, his Habar Gadir clan still celebrates October 3rd as a national holiday. Yes, they did. They did. Kind of like what they did in Afghanistan with our withdrawal from Afghanistan, where we pulled everybody out and left all of our stuff there, and they were hanging people from helicopters. The Taliban were flying American helicopters with people who were against them hanging from there. Yeah, it was bad. So there's a movie called Black Hawk Down that is about this particular thing that they were talking. What do you mean it's not allowed? Do you think those countries
I meant like I did not think you could. I did not think it was a lot. I did not think it was that you can air dead people on TV. I did not think it was allowed. I thought.
Oh no, they don't care. No, the news shows even worse now. So yes, Black Hawk Down was based on this. One of the technical military advisors was my stepmom's boss, and he was there. He was one of the few that actually survived. My brother-in-law was one of the Marines that were in Somalia trying to bring food and stuff to the people that were starving. And he said the warlords were horrific the way they treated their own people. It was bad. Like, as in, this was in the 90s, and my brother-in-law still has nightmares from his time there. It was really, really bad. All right, during the Somalian Civil War, they were invaded by Kenya. True or false? That would be false, right? What organization sent in peacekeepers? United Nations, good. Which country sent in special forces to Mogadishu? The United States. Who was president of the United States? Bill Clinton, okay. The Somalian Civil War ended in 1996 when Aidid was killed. False. So let's go back up. So you guys have false, UN, US, Bill Clinton, and false. Does everybody have that? Yes? Okay. So we can move on to the Google Maps tour, which is one of the first things we're doing in our journal. All right, so I'm going to click on. All right, so what is killing me is I am seeing some of you guys literally copying and pasting this and sticking it in your journal. Stop it. We're almost done with the year, and I don't know why I have kids still doing this. You have to click on this to get to the actual map, okay? So the areas we're talking about, we're going to talk about Nairobi, the Suez Canal, North Africa, and then South Sudan. So you see here, guys, where Somalia is. You see how that looks like a rhinoceros's horn, hence the name Horn of Africa. All right, so let's click on Nairobi. So when we're talking about Nairobi, in 1998, terrorists associated with Al-Qaeda bombed the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania and Africa, killing 224 people and injuring thousands. In retaliation, the U.S. launched cruise missiles at 2 suspected terrorist sites in Afghanistan and the Sudan. The bombings and immediate aftermath. Okay, so what happened? So at approximately 10:40 on August 7th, a truck bomb was detonated near the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi, Kenya. The blast killed 213 people, including 12 Americans and 31 Forest Service nationals. Almost simultaneously, another truck bomb exploded near the U.S. Embassy in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. That killed 11 people. More than 5,000 people were wounded in the two attacks. Both embassies sustained massive structural damage. Hang on just a second. Make sure I'm not missing. Okay. The FBI immediately sent a team to East Africa to assist in the search, rescue, and investigative efforts. After an exhaustive investigation, which included more than 1,000 interviews involving the largest overseas deployment of personnel in FBI history, the U.S. government quickly concluded that Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden, yes, the FBI actually does things overseas. They have task force that work with other countries. And it involves, it involves obviously Americans, right? But they work with the countries that they go into. Let's see, that Osama bin Laden was the mastermind behind the bombings. On August 20, U.S. Navy ships in the Arabian Sea and the Red Sea launched simultaneous Tomahawk cruise missile attacks on targets in Afghanistan and the Sudan. The attacks were aimed at what U.S. officials called a terrorist complex in East Afghanistan and a chemical weapons plant in the Sudanese capital of Khartoum. President Bill Clinton described the Afghan facility as one of the most active terrorist bases in the world and home to groups linked to bin Laden, included Al-Qaeda. The plant in Khartoum reportedly produced nerve gas and was also linked to bin Laden. So if we're talking about Nairobi, right, which if you see right here, we're talking about Nairobi right here. So we're talking about U.S. embassies being, bombed, struck at, whatever you want to call it, in Africa. And then the U.S. responds to that and finding out that basically this is coming from a mastermind in Afghanistan. Okay. So if you look at so we're talking about 1998. All right. So keep that in mind. The Suez Canal. So remember, prior to the Suez Canal, ships from Europe had to go all the way around Africa and all the way to the Indian Ocean, right? But with the Suez Canal being created, they could now travel through into the Red Sea and then down, right? So here we go, just because I wanted you guys to be able to see it. Okay. All right, the Egyptian president Gamal Nasser nationalized the canal in 1956 and placed it under the supervision of the Suez Canal Authority. The Suez Crisis, 1956 war against Great Britain, France, and Israel over the nationalization of the canal ensued, and the waterway was briefly closed until 1957. Failure of the British and French forces, coupled with U.S. opposition to the British and French actions, limited European influence in the region and began the increased involvement of the United States in the Middle East. A longer closure of the Suez Canal occurred from 1967 to 1975, a result of the Six-Day War with Israel. And that's when Israel literally attacked the Sinai Peninsula. The Suez Canal was Israel versus Egypt, and Israel won. Okay, so strategic waterway, and basically an argument over who is going to control it, even though the British are the ones who actually financed and built it. All right, North Africa. So we're talking about, if we look at this, we're in North Africa, we're in Egypt, right? This is where they're talking about, okay? The first major Allied advance into German-held territory during World War II, the North African campaign, was a slow and costly attempt to reclaim large areas of the Middle East from German control. The attack depended on the combined efforts of Allied generals. Why would they want Germany to not have control of this area? Can anybody tell me? Why wouldn't you want Germany to have control of this area? Come on, guys. Yeah, so they don't take over the resources, right? We know this area is very, very rich in oil. And, you know, we don't want Germany to have control over this area, right? Good. All right. So by the time Germany surrendered in mid-May, the Allies had lost over 76,000 troops. In addition to losing a large number of soldiers, the German army had also lost 238,000 men captured during the campaign. Losses suffered by Rommel resulted in his falling in disfavor with Adolf Hitler and the undermining of his brilliant military leadership by the Nazi regime. Breakdowns in communications between Allied commanders during the North African campaign revealed the shaky foundation of cooperation between military leaders, a problem that would be rectified when the Allied forces hit the beaches in Normandy in 1944. So when we talk about North Africa, we're talking about Allied versus Axis powers during World War II. Okay. South Sudan. So let me scroll out here a little bit. So South Sudan and then Sudan or North Sudan, you have Ethiopia, okay, Uganda, all of that. So in December 2013, President Salva Kiir accused Riek Machar, his former vice president, of trying to overthrow him, and civil war erupted in the region once more with resistance forces led by Machar. Ugandan troops intervened to support Kiir's government. UN sent peacekeepers to protect civilians. In 2014, after a ceasefire agreement was broken many times, the US accused pro-Machar forces of war crimes against civilians. In 2016, Kenyan troops withdrew from South Sudan after failing to protect civilians from violence. And for the first time in almost 70 years, Japan sent peacekeeping overseas who were told to use force if necessary. In December of 2016, a UN Human Rights Commission declared that ethnic cleansing occurred in parts of the country, which President Kiir denied. In February of 2017, the UN described the famine in South Sudan as a man-made catastrophe resulting from civil war and economic collapse. President Kiir declared a ceasefire and opened the way for diplomatic discussions in May of 2017. Finally, in August of 2018, President Kiir and Riek Machar signed a power-sharing agreement which reinserted Machar as one of 5 vice presidents to end the civil war. Okay, so if we are in our notebook, what would we say for our Google Map tour? What would we put in here? We've got about 3 minutes left in class. Anybody tell me? I'm waiting because I'm not giving you guys answers. I'm waiting for your response.
What was the question again?
What is the answer for the Google Map tour? What are we going to put in here, guys? I'm not giving you the answer to that. I'm waiting for you guys to give me the answer. Okay, so is that what we're going to type? There were tons of civil wars and countries fighting, but was it just civil war? And where were the civil wars? The civil war was in Sudan, right? But Nairobi was in civil war. So we could say there was a massive civil war in Sudan, right? So what did they say in South Sudan? What did they say that the ethnic cleansing, right? Okay, that's one. What about the other places, guys? We have 3 more that we have to discuss. So what else can we put in here? What's frozen? I'm not typing anything. All I have is this. I'm not typing anything else. You guys are telling me what to put. I'm not giving you answers. You guys are supposed to be giving me answers. If this is all I see you guys put in there, you're going to get a minimum F. So what else? We have 4 other places. Okay, yeah, that's great, my king. And that is something that, an elementary kid would tell me. You guys are 8th graders getting ready to go into high school. Well, some of you are. Some of you guys, at least half of you are going to be repeating this class. So somebody give me something for Nairobi or the Suez Canal or North Africa. All right, so we are done with class for the day. I need you guys to think about what you can put in your course arc, or not your course arc, your journal for the Google Maps. And then when we come back on Wednesday, we'll talk about it. Tomorrow is small group meet from 12:30 to 2:30 in the LA Rather SSG. And you will do your attendance. And yes, there will be a remind text and an announcement. Bye, guys. Have a good rest.